Sometimes a miracle doesn't knock. She collapses in the rain cold, silent, and clutching nothing but a doll. She was just a child, slipping through the cracks of a town too quiet to care. He was just a man, hiding from a world that once burned him. And Riley? He was just a dog old, scarred in body and memory, and nearly forgotten. But that night, when a girl fainted at a gas station and a dog barked as if the world depended on it, everything changed. Not with thunder, not with glory, but with the quiet decision to stay when no one else did. Willow Creek was not a place people passed through on their way to somewhere else. It was a town caught between the edge of forest and memory, where pine trees grew thick and the wind carried the scent of damp earth and long-forgotten stories. That late October afternoon, the sky was the color of old tin, and rain had been falling since morning steady. Thin needles of cold that soaked through flannel and bone. Most had retreated into warm kitchens or silent living rooms. But Jack Turner was still out on the road, driving his aging pickup toward the only gas station on the north end of town. Jack was 45, tall and square-shouldered, with sun-worn skin and eyes that had seen too much. His dark brown beard was threaded with gray, and his hands bore the calluses of a life that never softened. After serving nearly 2 decades as a firefighter and enduring a war zone stint assisting military medics overseas, Jack had retreated to a cedar cabin on the outskirts of Willow Creek, surrounded by trees and silence. He didn't speak much, not because he lacked the words, but because most things worth saying could be spoken in stillness. Riding beside him in the front seat, as always, was Riley. Riley was a large German shepherd, nearly 10 years old, with a thick black and tan coat and a scar on his right hind leg, a souvenir from a roadside explosion in Kandahar. That blast had nearly taken both of them, but Riley had dragged Jack out from the wreckage before collapsing himself. Since then, they were inseparable. Riley had grown slower with age, especially when storms rolled in and the damp got into his joints, but his amber eyes remained sharp, and his instincts were unshakable. As the truck pulled under the station's cracked awning, Jack stepped out, pulling his coat tighter against the wind. The place was nearly deserted, just an old sedan parked off to the side, and the sound of rain splattering against the pavement. Jack inserted the nozzle into the tank and leaned back against the side of his truck, his gaze drifting across the empty lot. That's when Riley growled. It wasn't a loud growl, but it was deep and steady. Jack turned just as Riley leapt down from the passenger seat and sprinted across the slick pavement, barking. Following the dog's line of sight, Jack saw her. A little girl, no older than 7, was standing a few yards from the pump station wall. She wore a thin, soaked cotton dress and muddy sneakers, with one lace dragging behind her. Her dark blonde hair was matted and tangled, hanging like threads down her shoulders. She held a tattered rag doll in both hands, pressed against her chest as if it were the only thing tethering her to this world. Her eyes met Jack's for the briefest second, haunted, unfocused, as if she wasn't entirely sure she was still real, before her knees buckled and she crumpled to the concrete. Jack was there in an instant, Riley close behind. The dog circled once, whined, and pressed his nose to the girl's cheek as Jack knelt beside her. Her skin was ice cold, her lips were cracked and faintly bluish, and her arms trembled even in unconsciousness. She was still clutching the doll. "Hey, kiddo," Jack muttered, lifting her gently into his arms. "You're all right now." He turned toward the small station building and kicked the door open with his boot. Inside, the clerk, a man in his late 50s with hunched shoulders, gray reading glasses, and a stained windbreaker, looked up from behind the counter, holding a cup of instant coffee. "She again?" he said with a sigh, not moving. "That's the girl from down by the east side. Seen her a couple times wandering, usually by the water tower. Quiet one." Jack stared at him. "You ever think of calling someone?" The man shrugged, nonchalant. "Didn't look hurt before. Kids run around all the time. Guess she's got issues." Jack didn't answer. He turned and walked straight back out into the rain, Riley at his heel. He didn't bother drying the passenger seat. He laid the girl down gently, covering her with his own flannel jacket. Riley jumped into the back seat, eyes never leaving the child. Jack started the engine and headed for Willow Creek's only medical clinic, a 20-minute drive through winding country roads. By the time they arrived, the girl was still unconscious. The rain had picked up, hammering the windshield in thin, angry slashes. Jack parked, scooped her up again, and carried her through the sliding doors of the clinic. The interior was dimly lit and smelled of antiseptic. A nurse in pale green scrubs, a soft-spoken woman named Clara, rushed forward. "What happened?" "Found her at the gas station," Jack said. "No idea how long she's been out." A young doctor in his early 30s, tall and sharp-eyed with curly dark hair and a navy blue vest over his scrubs, emerged from a side room. "Let's get her inside." 10 minutes later, Jack stood outside the exam room, dripping wet, hands clasped together, watching Riley pace slowly near the door. Eventually, Clara stepped out. "She's stable," the nurse said. "Severely dehydrated, and her blood sugar was dangerously low. No visible injuries, but it's clear she's been neglected. Long-term, probably. There's no ID, no name. She hasn't said anything except one word when she came to. Willow." Jack nodded slowly. "That's the town. Maybe it's all she could remember." Clara frowned. "We'll notify child services, but these things take time. If no one comes forward..." Jack looked down the hall toward the closed door. "Do you have somewhere she can stay tonight?" The nurse hesitated. "If there's no guardian confirmed, she'll be placed temporarily with the state's emergency foster care, but they usually can't take her until morning." Jack glanced at Riley, then back to Clara. "If it comes to that, she can stay with me, just for the night." Clara didn't answer right away. She studied him, his soaked clothes, the steadiness in his voice, the quiet conviction behind it, then finally said, "We'll see how she is in a few hours." Back in the room, Riley had moved to the side of the bed. The girl, now under a warm blanket, had turned her face slightly toward the window, though her eyes were still closed. Riley rested his chin near her elbow and let out a soft, low whine. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines. No one had reported the girl missing. Later, Jack would learn it was because Beth Morgan, the girl's aunt, had assumed Grace had simply run off again, as she often did since the death of her mother, and that the school hadn't noticed her absence because of the autumn break. But for now, none of that mattered. Jack sat beside the bed, watching as the child's chest rose and fell, and Riley stayed on alert, the soldier in him not yet ready to rest. The morning after the rain, Willow Creek awakened beneath a veil of fog. The pines stood motionless in the cold mist, and the air carried a chill that crept through coats and coats of memory alike. Jack Turner sat in the front waiting room of the town clinic, his hands clasped between his knees, elbows resting on his thighs. Beside him, Riley lay curled with his head up, ears alert, amber eyes trained on the hallway leading to the patient rooms. Though his old joints ached from the damp, he hadn't left that spot all night. At sunrise, Clara, the nurse from the night before, approached with a clipboard tucked under one arm. She was a woman in her early 40s, with crow's feet near her eyes and a tired but kind energy. She had once worked in the ER of a larger hospital in Portland, but after losing her brother to a house fire, she'd moved back to her hometown of Willow Creek, looking for quieter roads and manageable grief. Her voice was soft as she spoke to Jack. "She finally told us her name," Clara said. Grace Morgan." Jack nodded slowly. "Any emergency contacts?" "No," Clara replied. "No ID, no phone number, no address. But we looked through the county registry. Her mother, Caroline Morgan, passed away in a car accident 4 months ago. Grace's legal guardian is listed as Beth Morgan, her maternal aunt." Riley let out a low, almost inaudible huff, as if confirming something Jack couldn't yet name. Clara glanced toward the hallway. "She's awake, but quiet. Doesn't speak much. She asked for her doll." Jack stood and followed Clara to the room. Grace sat upright on the narrow hospital bed, a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The doll was tucked beside her, now half dry and worn even thinner. The girl's hair was still tangled, her face pale, but her eyes soft, stormy blue held more awareness than before. She didn't look at Jack when he entered, but she didn't flinch either. Riley padded into the room, walked up to the side of her bed, and lay down without a sound. "Do you remember what happened?" Jack asked gently, crouching at her eye level. Grace nodded once, barely. "You were trying to get somewhere?" She held the doll tighter and whispered, "To see Mom. It was her birthday." Jack felt something twist in his chest. "Where is your mom buried?" "The cemetery," she said. "Near the bridge. I was going to leave the doll." "You walked alone?" She nodded again. "It's not that far." Jack didn't correct her. It was nearly 2 miles from the address he would later learn was her home. For a well-fed child, maybe manageable. But for Grace, It had nearly been fatal. Later that afternoon, after filing a brief report with local child services, Jack drove Grace to the address listed in her files, a pale green house with flaking paint and shutters sagging from years of wind and disuse. It sat near the end of a gravel road, half hidden by skeletal trees and brush. Jack parked and glanced at Grace. "You sure about this?" She shrugged but nodded. Riley let out a low chuff from the back seat. The door opened before they even knocked. Beth Morgan stood in the frame, a woman around 40, tall and thin, with a narrow face framed by dark, untamed hair pulled back in a tired bun. She wore a navy blue sweater and faded jeans, her feet in mismatched socks. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable when they landed on Grace surprise, irritation, maybe guilt, but no joy. "She ran off again?" Beth asked flatly. "She fainted," Jack said, keeping his voice even. "At the gas station. She was severely dehydrated. If I hadn't been there—" Beth's lips tightened. "She does this sometimes. Says she wants to see her mom. I told her to stop. What's the point?" Jack studied her, resisting the heat rising in his chest. "She nearly died." "I didn't know she was gone," Beth said. "It's school break. She's quiet, stays in her room. I thought she was sulking again." Grace stood beside Jack, still silent. Riley positioned himself protectively in front of her, tail stiff. Beth blinked at the dog. "Big one." "His name's Riley," Jack said. "He's trained, and he knows when something isn't right." Beth stepped back. "Fine, come in." The house was dim and cold. Jack noticed the windows had been sealed with thick curtains, letting no natural light in. The living room had a sunken couch and a cracked TV on mute. A few mugs with half-drunk coffee sat on the table. The walls had peeling wallpaper and water stains. But what struck Jack was the absence. No photos, no toys, no drawings. The kind of emptiness that lingers long after someone gives up trying. Beth led them to a small room at the end of the hall. It was sparsely furnished. A narrow bed with a faded blanket, a nightstand, and a closet door slightly ajar. No books, no color. "She sleeps here," Beth said, then turned. "I have work in the morning. I can't miss another shift." Jack's brow furrowed. "Where do you work?" "The bakery downtown, mornings mostly." Beth's voice was clipped, as if every word cost something. He nodded. "Mind if I check in on Grace tomorrow?" Beth hesitated, then shrugged. "Do what you want." That night, Jack couldn't sleep. Riley, too, paced restlessly at the foot of his bed. Around 2 a.m., Jack sat on the porch, staring into the dark forest, mug of cold tea in hand. The rain had stopped, but the clouds hadn't lifted. He thought of Grace's face, of how tightly she had clung to that doll, of how Beth had never asked if she was okay, just why she had left. The next day, Jack stopped by the clinic to speak with Clara again. He learned Grace's mother, Caroline, had once worked part-time at the town library, was known to be quiet, gentle, and devoted to her daughter. The accident had been sudden. A truck driver lost control on a slick curve. Caroline died instantly. No father was listed on the birth certificate. Jack returned to the greenhouse that afternoon. Beth was home, smoking on the porch. Grace was inside, sitting at the small kitchen table, drawing on the back of an old grocery receipt. Riley entered first, went to her side, and lay down. "She has nightmares," Jack said quietly to Beth. Beth looked away. "Don't we all? She needs light, attention, a chance." Beth flicked her ash. "I'm trying." Jack didn't argue. He knew trying wasn't always enough. That night, Grace woke screaming. Jack wasn't there, but Riley was. The dog, who had insisted on staying by the girl's bed, barked sharply, once, twice, then louder. Beth stumbled down the hall, confused, and found the girl curled up, shaking. Riley stood over her, protective, unmoving. When Jack arrived the next morning, Grace came out to the porch holding Riley's leash. "He stayed," she said. "All night." Jack nodded. "He knows when someone needs watching over." Grace looked down. "I want to go back to the cemetery, but only if he comes." Jack crouched beside her. "We'll go, when you're stronger." And with Riley by her side, Grace nodded. The sky over Willow Creek was heavy with clouds that refused to rain, pressing down on the pines like a question left unanswered. In the quiet between storms, the air smelled of wet bark and rot, of things decaying just beneath the surface. Jack Turner stood in front of the pale green house again, his boots sinking slightly into the damp soil as he knocked on the weather-warped door. Riley stood beside him, tail still, his amber gaze alert. Jack didn't speak to the dog, but there was a shared tension in the way they both waited, as if neither quite trusted what might be waiting inside. Beth opened the door after a long pause. She wore a faded hoodie and threadbare sweatpants, her face drawn and pale, as if sleep had long abandoned her. A cigarette burned between two fingers, and the smell of cheap tobacco clung to the threshold like a warning. Her dark brown hair was tied in the same messy knot as the day before, her eyes bloodshot but dry. "You're back," she muttered. Not a question, just a flat observation. "You said I could check in on her," Jack replied, voice steady. Beth shrugged, stepping aside without looking at him. "She's in her room." Jack and Riley entered the house. The living room remained untouched. No signs of care or life. No pictures, no books. Just the hum of an old refrigerator echoing through silence. The air was thick with dampness, the scent of mildew creeping from corners and carpets that hadn't seen sunlight in months. Down the narrow hallway, Jack paused at a door half closed. He knocked gently. "It's me," he said. "Can I come in?" There was a faint sound fabric shifting, then the soft creak of mattress springs. Grace's voice barely louder than breath. "Okay." Jack stepped in. The room was small and gray, with only one narrow window almost completely covered by a heavy curtain. A thin shaft of light broke through a rip in the fabric, casting a pale strip across the bed. Grace sat on top of the covers, legs folded under her, hugging her ragged doll to her chest. She wore the same oversized sweatshirt she had the day before, sleeves pulled over her hands. Riley padded in behind Jack and immediately settled near the bed, his body curled but his head up, watching. Grace reached out and rested her hand on his neck. He didn't move, but let out a soft breath. "How are you feeling?" Jack asked. Grace nodded, though her eyes were shadowed. "I didn't dream last night," she said. "Because Riley was there." Jack smiled faintly. "He's good at that." "I used to have dreams about my mom," she added after a pause. "But Beth doesn't like it when I talk about her." "Why not?" Grace looked down. "She says it makes things worse." Jack didn't respond right away. He took a slow breath and looked around the room. No toys, no books. The wallpaper was peeling at the edges, and the floor beneath the window showed signs of water damage. A cracked light fixture flickered overhead. "Did you used to have a nightlight?" he asked gently. "I did. It broke." "Did anyone fix it?" "No." Jack stepped back and took out his phone. Quietly, he snapped a few photos of the room, the water stain, the bare shelves, the broken lamp. He had no intention of accusing Beth without cause, but documentation mattered, especially when neglect hid in plain sight. Later that afternoon, as Jack stood outside the house preparing to leave, Beth joined him on the porch. She had changed into jeans and a heavy cardigan, her posture defensive but not entirely closed off. "She's not easy, you know," Beth said, arms folded. "She doesn't talk much, doesn't eat sometimes, stays up all night crying and then won't say why." "She lost her mother," Jack said calmly. "So did I," Beth snapped. "Caroline was my sister." He looked at her, really looked at the deep lines around her mouth, the tension in her shoulders, the weary way she leaned against the post, like it was the only thing holding her up. "I know that," Jack said, "but Grace is a child. She doesn't know how to hold all that pain." Beth's eyes flickered with something, grief, maybe, or the echo of it. "I'm doing what I can." "I believe you," he replied, though he wasn't sure he did. That night, Jack drove back to his cabin and sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a notebook where he had begun to collect observations. Riley lay nearby, head resting on his paws, tail twitching now and then, as if replaying memories. Jack glanced at him. "You remember Cobble?" he asked aloud. Riley's ears perked slightly. "You pulled me out of that burning hallway," Jack murmured. "I couldn't see a damn thing, but you knew where to go. You always know." Riley let out a soft huff. Jack opened a drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the contact for Amelia Shaw, a veterinarian and an old friend from high school. She had left Willow Creek years ago to work with military K-9 units and had recently returned, opening a small clinic at the edge of town. Jack hadn't seen her in almost 2 decades, but if anyone would understand Riley's behavior and what it meant when a dog wouldn't leave a child's side, it would be her. The next day, he made an appointment under the pretense of checking on Riley's leg. Amelia greeted him with the same warm, direct energy. He remembered shoulder-length auburn hair tucked behind her ears, practical jeans and flannel rolled at the sleeves, a no-nonsense tone softened by a kind smile. "Still hauling around this old boy?" she said as she knelt to examine Riley. "He still hauls me around most days," Jack replied. As she worked, Jack told her about Grace, about the gas station, the hospital, the house, the silence, about how Riley refused to leave her. Amelia listened carefully, her hand steady as she palpated Riley's leg. "She's scared," Amelia said, "and Riley knows. Dogs like him don't just protect, they absorb. You think he can help her? I think he already is, but you need to act. If she's in danger, emotional, physical, you have to start a paper trail." Jack nodded. "Will you help?" Amelia straightened. "I'll write up a medical observation on her condition and his reaction. It's not a diagnosis, but it's a start." As Jack left the clinic, Riley jumped into the front seat, tail thumping once against the door. Jack rubbed the dog's neck. "You're not just remembering war, are you?" he murmured. "You're remembering what it's like to be pulled out of a fire. And this time, it wasn't smoke or bombs, but something colder, quieter." The rain had returned, heavier than before, sweeping over Willow Creek in relentless sheets that blurred the windows and soaked the gravel roads in thick layers of mud. Jack Turner sat in the front room of the pale green house, the dim yellow glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the cracked linoleum. Riley lay at his feet, ears twitching with every gust of wind that rattled the loose siding. It was late, nearly midnight, and Jack had stayed longer than usual. Grace had asked him to help her sharpen a set of colored pencils she found in the back of a kitchen drawer, and something in her eyes, the way she didn't want him to leave, had kept him sitting there beside her until she finally drifted off to sleep. The girl had begun drawing again, not just scribbles or abstract shapes, but full images, quietly powerful things that no child should have known how to put on paper. The day before, she had shown Jack a picture of a man and a dog standing in front of a gravestone beneath a tree, the sky above streaked with what looked like rain and fire all at once. She hadn't said it was him and Riley, but it didn't need to be. In her eyes, Jack saw a kind of recognition, a silent thank you, or perhaps just the fragile hope that not all men walked away. He was about to stand when Riley's head snapped up, ears rigid. The dog growled low in his throat, a sound Jack hadn't heard in years. A second later, Riley was on his feet, racing down the hallway toward Grace's room. Jack followed without hesitation, his boots thudding against the wooden floor. The hallway was dark, only the occasional flicker of lightning outlining the doorframes. Grace's door was slightly ajar. Riley scratched at it, barking now, sharp, frantic. Jack pushed it open and froze. Beth was inside, crouched by the desk, with a lighter in one hand and a piece of paper in the other. Her shoulders trembled, and her breath came in harsh, shallow bursts. Grace sat up in bed, blankets clutched to her chest, eyes wide with silent confusion. "Beth," Jack said, stepping forward, voice low but firm. "What are you doing?" Beth didn't answer right away. The lighter clicked once, twice, the flame flickering against the edge of the page. Riley growled again and positioned himself between her and Grace. Jack crossed the room quickly and took the lighter from her hand before she could react. The paper trembled. He looked down. It was a letter. The ink was smudged in places, the folds softened by time. The handwriting was delicate, slanted. At the top was a name. "To my daughter, Grace." Jack glanced at Beth. "You were going to burn this?" he asked. Beth's face contorted. I didn't mean to. I found it in her drawer. Her voice cracked. Grace's whisper broke through the thunder. "It was from Mom." Beth backed away, her whole frame shaking. "I couldn't take it. Every time she says her name. Caroline, Caroline, like she's still here. Like I'm not even trying." Jack placed the letter gently on the desk, then turned to her. "You're not well, Beth." "I'm tired," she snapped. "I wake up every day and it's like the funeral never ended. I lost my sister, and now every day I have her shadow staring back at me, asking why she's not here instead of me." Tears finally came, hot and uncontrolled. She collapsed into the corner chair, arms wrapped around herself. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to hurt her. Jack crouched beside Grace. The girl was trembling, eyes fixed on the desk. Riley pressed his head gently against her knee. Jack spoke softly. "It's okay. You're safe now." Grace leaned forward, wrapped her arms around Riley, and buried her face in his fur. The next morning, the rain had lightened, but the sky remained gray and close. Jack stepped out into the muddy yard with the letter tucked inside a waterproof folder. He called Amelia. She met him at the veterinary clinic, wearing a navy coat and a thick wool scarf, her auburn hair damp at the edges. Her face tightened when Jack handed her the letter. "She tried to burn this?" Amelia asked. He nodded. Amelia unfolded the letter carefully and read it, eyes scanning line by line. She said nothing for a while. "I know someone in Portland," she said finally. "Eleanor Monroe. She handles special custody cases, especially situations with emotional instability or guardianship violations. I'll send her this today." "Will it be enough?" Jack asked. "It'll be the beginning," she said. They parted without much more conversation, but Jack knew Amelia would follow through. She always had. In high school, she'd been the one who stood up when no one else did. After her father died in a factory explosion and her family had to fight the insurance system tooth and nail, she'd vowed to never let someone fall through the cracks if she could help it. Back at the house, Grace didn't mention the night before. She sat at the kitchen table, sketching with a quiet determination. Today's drawing was of a dog and a little girl sitting beneath a willow tree. In the tree's branches hung stars like ornaments. Jack watched from the corner, Riley at his feet. Later that day he checked on Beth, who hadn't come out of her room. She answered the door with puffy eyes and a hoarse voice. "I'm not proud of what I did," she said. "I know," Jack replied. Beth hesitated. "You really think I'm dangerous to her?" "I think you're in pain, but that doesn't mean Grace should carry it." Beth said nothing. When Jack turned to leave, she said quietly, "I'll go stay with a friend for a while. You take care of her." That evening, Jack made dinner for Grace, nothing fancy, just grilled cheese and tomato soup. She ate slowly, occasionally feeding crusts to Riley, who lay with his chin resting on her foot. "Do you think my mom knew this would happen?" she asked softly. Jack looked at her. "I think your mom knew you were strong, and that someone would find you, someone who'd stay." Grace nodded, tears forming but not falling. "I don't want to forget her." "You don't have to," Jack said. "Not ever." Grace leaned against Riley, and this time, she closed her eyes without fear. The morning of the custody hearing arrived beneath a shroud of pale fog, draping Willow Creek in an eerie quiet. The courthouse stood at the center of town like an old bone, white paint fading, its columns streaked with rain. Inside, the heat from aging radiators warred with the chill seeping through the tall windows. Jack Turner sat in a small waiting chamber, the folded letter from Caroline in his coat pocket, his palms resting flat on his knees. Beside him sat Riley, his thick coat slightly damp from the mist outside, ears forward, perfectly still. Across from Jack, Grace sat quietly, her legs dangling from the edge of the chair, not swinging. She wore a navy blue dress Amelia had brought over the night before, along with a warm gray cardigan that hung loose on her narrow frame. Her hair was braided down her back, slightly messy, but the best she could do herself. In her arms was the same worn doll she had clutched that first day at the gas station. The courtroom clerk, a woman in her 60s named Judith, with short white hair and a calm demeanor, had smiled gently at Grace when she arrived and whispered that the doll was perfectly okay to bring inside. Judith had worked at the courthouse for over 30 years, known for her precision and her quiet strength. Her own daughter had gone through a long custody battle, and Judith had never forgotten what it was like to watch a child be pulled between two people who both believed they were right. She had made it a personal mission that no child ever felt invisible in her courtroom. They were called into the hearing room just after 9. The chamber wasn't large, just a table at either end, a judge's bench at the center, and 2 tall windows behind the bench shrouded in condensation. The session was closed to the public. It would be quiet, without press, and it was intended not to intimidate. Judge Paul Merritt presided, a man in his late 50s with a square jaw, deep-set eyes, and a steady voice that carried neither cruelty nor softness. He was known in 3 counties as firm but unafraid to listen. Merritt had a reputation for asking hard questions gently and holding adults to a higher standard than children. Today his black robe looked slightly rumpled, and he had the air of someone who had read every file 3 times before even calling the room to order. On one side of the table sat Jack and his temporary legal counsel, Mary Ann Sloan, a public attorney from Portland with sharp cheekbones, practical glasses, and the calm confidence of someone who'd been doing this work for 20 years. She had reviewed the letter, the medical report, and Amelia's testimony carefully, speaking to Jack only once the day before, assuring him, "You've already done the hardest part, being present." Across from them sat Beth Morgan. She wore a dark charcoal suit, her hair pinned neatly, her makeup subtle but deliberate. There was no lawyer beside her. She had declined counsel, choosing to speak for herself. Her eyes didn't meet Grace's when the girl was led in by the guardian ad litem, a neutral third party assigned to represent the child's best interest. The guardian, Ms. Trudy Kendall, was a small-framed woman in her 40s with auburn curls and a lined leather notepad. She was warm but observant, asking Grace only a few quiet questions during their private session the week prior. Judge Merritt began by summarizing the case. The room was silent except for the soft rustle of paper. He read excerpts from Caroline's letter, the testimony of Amelia Shaw, and Clara's medical intake notes. He acknowledged Jack's emergency intervention and Riley's certification process as a therapy animal, which had been expedited by Amelia's supporting documentation. Then he paused, folded his hands, and spoke directly to Grace. "You've had to be very brave, haven't you?" he asked gently. Grace looked at him and nodded once. "Can I ask you a question?" he continued. She nodded again. "If you could choose who to live with, just for now, where would you feel safest?" Grace's voice was barely audible. "With the one who never made me scared." The room fell completely still. Beth blinked rapidly. Her shoulders drew in, her breath shaky. But she didn't interrupt. Judge Merritt nodded, then turned toward her. "Ms. Morgan, would you like to speak?" Beth stood slowly. "I don't have a prepared statement," she said. "I didn't even plan to talk. But when I heard her say that," her voice broke slightly. "I didn't hit her, I didn't lock her up or starve her, but I forgot how to care. When I lost my son 10 years ago, something in me broke, and when my sister died, I thought maybe I could fix it by protecting Grace, by keeping her close, keeping her quiet. But silence isn't safety, and I see that now." She turned slightly, eyes finally landing on Grace. "I didn't mean to make you feel afraid. I was afraid, every day, that if I let you grieve, I'd lose you too, and I'm sorry." Judge Merritt nodded again, then placed a folded sheet on the bench. After reviewing all submitted documentation, the court finds sufficient evidence of emotional neglect, though not of abuse. Considering the psychological state of the minor and the supporting testimony, we will assign temporary custody to Mr. Jack Turner for a period of 60 days. During this time, the child will remain under observation by the Department of Social Services, with oversight from attorney Eleanor Monroe in Portland. "Ms. Morgan, you may request supervised visitation during this period." He looked back at Grace. "Riley may accompany Grace as a certified therapy dog. His presence has shown clear emotional benefit." There was no applause, no tears, just a long, slow exhale from Jack and a quiet nod from Grace, who leaned slightly into Riley's warm side. Beth sat back down, face unreadable, but she didn't protest. When they left the courthouse, the mist had begun to clear. Grace held Jack's hand in one and the doll in the other. Riley trotted ahead, nose to the ground, tail wagging once. They didn't speak until they reached the truck. Jack opened the door for her, helped her in, then got behind the wheel. "Do I still get to draw?" Grace asked quietly. Jack looked over and smiled. "You can draw anything you want." She nodded, then added, "Even dreams that haven't happened yet? Especially those?" Riley barked once, short and low, as if approving the message. As they pulled away from the courthouse, Grace reached down and placed her hand on Riley's back. He didn't move. He didn't need to. He had already chosen where he belonged. The cabin stood at the edge of the forest like something out of a forgotten painting. Modest, weathered, with its cedar planks faded to the color of soft ashwood and its roof gently sloping beneath a canopy of whispering pines. Morning light spilled through the open window in golden ribbons, catching dust in its descent and illuminating the worn floorboards. It was quiet except for the rhythmic creak of a rocking chair on the front porch and the occasional chirp of birds just waking in the trees. Grace Morgan now called this place home. It had been 2 weeks since the court's decision, and each day at the cabin stitched together what had once felt too torn to mend. The change didn't happen all at once. There were still silences, moments when her small shoulders curled in on themselves, and nights when thunder rolled and her fingers gripped the blanket a little tighter. But gradually, the house began to feel less like a stranger's place and more like a gentle room that knew her name. Jack Turner had made few changes. He wasn't a man of clutter or complication, but a second cup now always sat beside his coffee, and the fridge held more than leftovers and black coffee creamer. A shelf in the corner of the cabin began to fill with colored pencils and notebooks. Amelia had sent over a second-hand easel and a box of art supplies, leaving them on the porch one morning with a note, "For Grace, to draw her dreams." The note was now pinned on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a golden retriever. Riley had taken up a new post. Every night, he curled beneath Grace's bed, his breath steady, his ears always attuned. He no longer growled in his sleep. The old limp in his right leg still surfaced during cold nights, but Grace had taken it upon herself to gently massage the joint with a warm towel Amelia had taught her how to use. The bond between them had deepened into something wordless, sacred like two survivors keeping watch over each other. Each morning, Grace would rise early and sit at the small wooden table in the corner of the living room, sketching with quiet focus. She still drew the same tree over and over, a tall willow with wide roots and outstretched arms. But now there were other figures beneath it, a dog, a man, sometimes a sun in the corner, sometimes stars. One afternoon, Jack returned from chopping wood and found Grace curled up in the reading chair, a book open on her knees and Riley's head resting on her feet. She was reading aloud, haltingly, carefully, a poem from a collection she'd borrowed from the town library. "And when the leaves fall, I'll remember your voice in the wind," she read, then looked up. "Is that what poetry is supposed to do?" Jack wiped the sweat from his brow, set the axe down by the door, and said, "I think that's exactly what it's supposed to do." That conversation planted a seed. A few days later, Grace came home from school with a folded flyer in her backpack. The town's annual Fall Festival was coming up, an event held at the community field with apple pies, hay rides, and an open mic hour for local children. Grace, cheeks slightly pink, asked Jack if she could read something. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Only if you want to." "I do," she said. "I want to read something about Mom, and Riley, and you." The festival took place under a canopy of gold and amber leaves. Stalls lined the grassy field, filled with cinnamon cider, knit scarves, and handmade candles. Jack wore a flannel shirt and jeans, standing near the back with his arms folded, trying not to look like he was bracing for a house fire. Riley lay at his feet, eyes half closed, unmoving except for his ears, which perked up every time Grace's voice was mentioned. When it was her turn, Grace walked up to the little platform stage holding a folded piece of paper. Her navy dress fluttered slightly in the breeze. She cleared her throat, looked down, then raised her eyes to the small crowd of townsfolk. Some she recognized from school, others strangers, but none unkind. "My name is Grace," she began, her voice steady despite a faint tremble. "This is a poem I wrote. It's called The Man Who Didn't Walk Away." There was a pause, and then she read, "When I was cold, he found me. When I was scared, he didn't ask why. He didn't look at me like a problem. He looked like he saw someone worth waiting for. There was a dog, too. He doesn't talk, but he knows when to sit beside me and when to bark at ghosts. My mom's not here anymore, but sometimes I feel her in the wind, and I think she's not worried now because someone stayed." There was silence after the last line, not out of uncertainty, but reverence. Then a ripple of applause began, soft and building, until the little field filled with clapping and quiet cheers. Grace smiled, stepped down from the platform, and walked back to Jack, who hadn't moved an inch. He didn't say, "I'm proud of you." He didn't need to. The way he knelt, the way he met her at eye level and let her lean into his shoulder, those were the words. Riley brushed against her side, his tail wagging gently. As the sun began to set, casting long orange shadows across the field, the three of them returned to the cabin. Grace kicked off her boots at the door, dropped her drawing pad on the couch, and ran into the backyard where the wind tossed leaves like confetti. Riley bounded after her, playful despite his age, barking once in delight. She spun in circles beneath the falling leaves, laughing, her arms out like wings. Jack sat on the porch step, a mug of warm cider in hand. He didn't speak. He just watched the girl and the dog dancing in the golden light, the quiet peace that followed after a long season of fear. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a man on the outside looking in. He felt home. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it comes on 4 quiet paws, in the way a child dares to smile again, or through a man who simply chooses not to walk away. Grace didn't just find safety, she brought it to life. In her eyes, a tired soldier saw purpose again. In Riley's quiet devotion, fear gave way to trust. And in one small wooden cabin at the edge of a forgotten forest, something sacred took root. Perhaps it wasn't chance. Perhaps it was grace in its truest, most tender form. Because when we choose to love the hurting, to stay when it's easier to leave, we open the door to miracles, not loud ones, but real ones. If this story stirred something in your heart, share it with someone who still believes in goodness. Leave a comment to tell us what Grace's journey awakened in you. And if you believe that even in silence, God is still working, type Amen below. Subscribe for more true stories of courage, kindness, and the quiet love that saves us. May you be blessed, and may you never miss the gentle miracles walking right beside you.